Going on, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the Big Ten Show. I am your host, Justin Adams, and I am joined today by none other than Big Ten Ted. I'm sure you've seen his channel. Great stuff going on over there. Appreciate him taking the time to be on the channel. It's the second time on, so really appreciate you being on, Ted. And do you want to tell the people where they can find you and what you got going on?
Yeah, over on YouTube. It's kind of the OG, as I say, of the Big Ten Ted social media platforms. Over there, we continue to grow as the season goes along. So appreciate everybody for coming along for the ride. Also on audio podcast platform on Spotify. If you're more of an audio listener in your car or work at the gym or wherever, right? So over there on Spotify, you can find me there. On Twitter at Big Ten Ted over there as well. So yeah, you can find me in a lot of places. And it's been a fun season so far. We continue to power on over the Big Ten Ted side. So it's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, man. Great stuff going on over there. Love your content. So, today what we kind of wanted to touch on, and I wanted to bring you on, is go over some Big Ten storylines. And I got four storylines of my own kind of here, and some of the questions that a lot of Big Ten teams have about certain, Michigan that we'll get into. But I just want to dive into there, and we'll start with Michigan. Michigan, Of course, coming out of the season, struggling to pass the ball, switched to Alex Orji. Alex Orji was who many believed to be the starter up until a couple weeks before the season started. And then, Davis Warren did what he did. Alex Orji comes in, is able to pull an upset against USC. But how good can Michigan actually be without their passing offense? I know they're an offense and they're a team that has confidence. I've seen them have confidence because they're under Sharon Moore still. They still have that confidence of like, we're a championship team. We're a championship program. That's still there. But how far can that get them without the ability to pass the ball?
Well, getting Colston Loveland back this past week certainly will help, and he's going to be, he's one of the best tight ends in the country, so they got to lean on him. But yeah, you mentioned it. Is this sustainable? I think that's the question, right? Because if I'm a defensive coordinator, if I'm a defense approaching Michigan, I mean, just load the box. Like I think Joel Klatt pointed it out on the broadcast against Minnesota. They're like, these safeties and these guys, they're drifting back. Get in the box. Against this Michigan team, you load them up, you have a single high safety, and that's the way I think that you can defend this Michigan team. And you look at the schedule the rest of the way for Michigan, you look at how Indiana's playing and Illinois is playing. They got to go on the road to both of those teams. They got to go on the road to Ohio State. Now, they get Oregon at home, right? But we're going to be talking, I think, about those teams a little bit later here in this episode, just how good they are right now. So, it's in this offensive line at the beginning of the season maybe wasn't as good, but it is getting better. I certainly will say that. But they're going to need some semblance of a passing game, because otherwise I think it could be an 8-4 season. It could be a 9-3 season. You're going to have, here's the thing I'll say about Michigan. They're not going to blow anybody out. Yes. All right. I feel pretty firm in that. I know they play Northwestern a little bit later on the season. That could maybe be the one. Michigan State, right? Those could maybe be a couple of candidates. But, when you take on some of these teams that I mentioned before, I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough to really get, you look at Minnesota and where I think you and I both think Minnesota is, maybe towards the bottom half of the league. Right now, they're sitting at 2-3, and look what the Gophers were able to do. I think the Gophers were able to exploit something where, hey, if we keep their defense on the field, we shut down this run game. It's a picture-perfect formula, and if you have a quarterback and you have an offense that can move the field and really get Michigan gas, they don't have as much depth on defense as they did last year. So I think there's been, Minnesota, I think in the second half really revealed what you need to be able to do to defeat this Michigan team. So they're going to need to find a way to play Iowa football, right? The last few years where they don't have much offensively. You got to win special teams. You got to have a good punt game with Tommy Doman. You got to force turnovers, right? You got to do these extra things knowing the deficiencies you have on the offensive side of the football. It wouldn't surprise me to lose one or both of those I schools, Indiana and Illinois, the way those teams are balanced right now. I think that's a key for them. So I don't think it's ultra sustainable right now for Michigan. Now, that being said, right, if you can play a game like you did against USC where you can get explosive run plays, then drag the other team down and continue to play good defensive football, that's the game plan. Michigan's got one way to win. All right. And I said it last year about Michigan. Michigan can beat you any way they choose to beat you. J.J. McCarthy could throw the ball. They could run it with Corum. They could get big plays from Edwards. That's not the case this year. They got one way to win. And if that way doesn't work, they could lose. They could lose, and they could lose to maybe teams that aren't quite at their talent level.
Absolutely. And to me, what they're really going to have to try to do is start to move the pocket with Orji and get him into a couple short throws, get him into a rhythm so he can see some of those passes go. And they're just going to have to scheme up kind of a wide open receiver. They're going to have to scheme up plays where he's throwing to a wide open guy because he's not going to fit in tight windows. He doesn't trust his arm enough. But I think what makes Michigan good and is really going to help them in certain situations is because they have a culture of winning. We saw it against USC. USC threw a punch at them, but Michigan landed the final blow, right? And that's a culture of winning, right? I'm a Nebraska fan, so I know what culture of losing is like. And that is going to make them good and help them in a lot of games. But again, just this one dimension, stack the box on them, bring your safeties down, force them to beat you over the top. If your safeties are back, it better be because they had an explosive player. They threw the ball over the top.
Right. Exactly. And we'll talk, when we talk about Indiana, we'll talk about their physicality in just a little bit. I think Illinois has been improved on the defensive front. I think they're a little bit ahead of schedule out there as well. And let's talk about Kaleo Mullings. Like, let's not, and I know we're kind of talking maybe on the downside with Michigan, but there's a lot of great running backs, especially across this conference. Yeah. Right. You look at Kyle Monangai at Rutgers. Caleb Johnson is just doing crazy things over there at Iowa. He's in that discussion with someone like Ashton Genty so far, in that he should be in that Heisman conversation. I know he's really not nationally, but he should be. But Kaleo Mullings is in that category. Jonah Coleman up there for Washington has been doing really good. He's got to be in that category. As one of the best running backs in the conference right now. Like, you look at USC breaking arm tackles, just willing his way down the field to put Michigan in a position to score late in the game. Like, that says a lot. And I think he has certainly established himself as the top running back. And I think Donovan Edwards is fitting, once again, good in that number 2 role where he can hit some of those explosive runs as well. So, I know they're one dimension, but they do the dimension pretty good, right? Historically at Michigan. So it's going to be interesting to see. You talk about moving the pocket, Alex Orji, of course. You saw him. I think the coaching staff, trusted him more against Minnesota than I anticipated. Yeah. Right. I thought there were if I said in my preview, I set the over under for passes at 9.5. I thought there was a world where they went under in that game, but credit to the coaching staff trying to get that confidence up with Alex Orji. And you saw when he's able to drop back, he has the awareness and wherewithal to be able to use his legs and scramble as well. So there's a formula to make this all work, but it is a narrow window for Michigan. And if we start to get outside that window frame a little bit, it could get a little dicey.
Yeah, exactly. I think Michigan's going to have to be forced out of that game before we see them really show the cracks. But I just think Michigan's a well-coached unit. Again, I love the Sharon Moore hire. I feel like that was the best course of action they could have done. So Michigan, regardless, they're going to be a really, really, really tough team to beat. With that being said, we'll move over to Oregon. And talking about Oregon, the first couple of weeks of the season, we know Oregon came out. They had the offensive line issues. They really, really struggled in a lot of areas that we didn't expect. But I wasn't, a lot of people were jumping on Oregon, but, those first couple of weeks, survive and advance, right? And what great teams do and what great coaches do is they look at the film and they fix those issues. Yep. And it seems Oregon has fixed a lot of those issues. Now, are they the team we thought they would be coming into the season? Maybe not quite, but they're an elite team nonetheless. Have they made the necessary adjustments to where they can be a legitimate top 5 team and a legitimate threat to Ohio State at the top of this Big Ten conference?
Boy, I tell you what, man, when we were beginning the season, October 12th seemed like it was a long ways away. This thing's coming up pretty quick. That matchup against Ohio State is just a couple of weeks away. Like, we've already got the television announcement. That's how close it is. Of course, that one's going to be in primetime on NBC, which everybody should be excited about. But I think they're creeping up there. That performance against Oregon State, really, it was all about finding the correct offensive line combination. Yep. When Matthew Bedford was injured in the preseason, they really had to shuffle some things around. And once they got the right combination, you saw what you expected from Oregon. Now, here's the thing: in this last game against UCLA, they were ahead. I think it was 21-3 late in the first half, and then you have a pick six go the other way. It gets to 28-10 at half, and then UCLA just kind of hangs around for a little bit, and Oregon, and they just get one score. Now they got to think a lot bit more conservative play calling, certainly in the second half of that after dark game at the Rose Bowl. But, I kind of wanted to see a little bit more of a commanding performance against UCLA. I thought they could have beat them by 35 or 40 points personally. But like we said, maybe they took their foot off the gas a little bit. This Friday night against Michigan State, I think is going to say a lot to see, because I want to see a really impressive performance going into that game against Ohio State. But yeah, I think that this team is certainly putting the pieces together. I think it's fairly obvious that Oregon wants to try to put the right pieces in the right spots. You might have some bumps in the road when you're trying to figure things out, but they want to get everything right for October 12th. They know that's the peak of their season. And then you look at the back half of that schedule, Michigan, who we talked about before, is really the only significant challenger to, I think, Oregon in the back half of that schedule as well. So I think that they're certainly going to be in that race. I said earlier this week on my show that I think there's 7 teams that could finish with an 8-1 conference record or better. Oregon is one of those teams. So getting that win over Ohio State might help them out a little bit when it comes to the tiebreaker. You don't want to leave anything to chance with these tiebreakers this year, where you could see a lot of these teams certainly be in that one loss type of category. But yeah, I think Oregon is certainly playing a lot better right now. They're getting things together. They're getting healthier on defense as well. It sounds like linebacker Jeffrey Bassa is back to 100%. Been really impressed with the play of Bryce Betcher filling in for him at the line. Like, their linebacker core is now a lot deeper than I felt it was in the preseason. I think defense is a big part of this. Derek Harmon and Jordan Birch are doing a really good job pressuring up front. Their secondary is really, I think they were leading the country or leading the Big Ten at one point in passes defended and batting those balls away. So I feel good about the defense. And I think the offense. And I think the offense is certainly getting it together as well. Like, you've seen when Dylan Gabriel has time. I mean, this guy is man, he's fantastic. Like,
even when he didn't, in that one game, it's crazy. But sorry, go ahead.
You look at that game against Oregon State, he had trouble throwing an incomplete pass, and he had all kinds of time against the Beavers to throw the football. So yeah, it should be, I feel really good about the Ducks. I know they've dropped off a little bit, but this is still a team that it can still be a Big Ten championship sort of team. And the thing about Ohio State and Oregon, like, we got Ohio State taking on Iowa. We've got Oregon facing Michigan State. I think there will be some pushback, but it's not like they're playing, a team like a Penn State or even a Michigan or some of these, like Indiana and Illinois, which are good. So we might not find out a lot about these teams until they play each other on October 12th.
100%. And I think, over time, the Big Ten Conference is one of those conferences that, Oregon playing against the Pac-12, of course, they're going to look a lot better. And then coming into the season, of course, we expected them to play well. And of course, they didn't. But I think you brought up a really good point as to they don't need to have it figured out in week 1, in week 2, in week 4. They need to have it figured out by the time they get, because they are good enough to beat these teams where they're at. Right. But they just need to improve each and every game. And this is what I try to tell people it's about going 1-0 every week. It doesn't have to look sexy. You go 1-0 every week, you're going to win the national championship. That's the mindset that they need to have. And that's the mindset that they have. And Oregon did a really good job of not coming out there and listening to the naysayers. And Dan Lanning, like you said, did a good job of, plug and play and mixing things around and figuring out a great combination, how to scheme up that blocking and stuff like that to improve their struggles early on. And Dylan Gabriel's incredible. He's phenomenal. Their DBs, you were talking about them, incredible ball skills from their defensive backs. That makes them that much better. Passes deflected. That's a big part of their ball skills. And there's tremendous ball skills on the outside, which is it's not talked about enough in terms of defensive backs. But I agree with you on the linebacking core. The defense to me has been better than expected. It was just those offensive woes a little bit. Right now, I still have Oregon as the second best in the conference. Do you think Penn State's passed them in your eyes, or are you still with Oregon at 2?
Boy, these are two different kind of football teams. It's kind of hard to compare them right now. Penn State, I said it after winning against Illinois, they're methodical. Okay, I know the score is only 21-7, but I thought Penn State played a really good football game. But I also thought Illinois played a really good football game. I thought both those teams ended up coming away pretty strongly. But when I compare them to Oregon, I think Oregon's more explosive. right now on the offensive side of the football. But then you look at that run game for Penn State, and they're humming. They're doing some really good things. The offensive line is certainly gaining some confidence up front. This is a tough one. I give the quarterback advantage, I think, to Oregon. I think they're more explosive out there as well. Defense, boy, that pass rush, we heard all about at the beginning of the season, and it came to play against Illinois. That's what we want to see. If that Penn State defensive line shows up all year long, good luck. That's all I'm going to say. Good luck. Penn State's got a big game against Ohio State. There may be some preseason concerns about the Ohio State offensive line. Maybe that could give Penn State a little bit of an edge in that particular game. But right now, I think I agree with you. I got Oregon. Maybe can we go 2A and 2B? Maybe something like that. I think I got Oregon slightly above Penn State, but those are teams that are certainly in the Big Ten championship conversation.
Exactly. And stylistically, to me, a Penn State Oregon matchup would almost be more fun to think about than the Oregon Ohio State matchup, just because the difference in styles. Ohio State can be explosive, Oregon can be explosive, but just seeing how those two teams would come together and play against each other, styles make fights, that type of situation, it would put a lot of pressure on both teams for sure. So moving forward to Indiana, of course, Indiana's been a darling of this season. Hard team not to root for. Curt Cignetti doing a great job over there. I said coming into the season, due to the fact that they had so many transfers in from James Madison, that I thought they could be the worst team in the Big Ten, or they had the most upside. When I thought most upside, I wasn't talking about this. I was talking, they had the potential, I think, to make the biggest jump in my power rankings from what they were expected versus what they were able to do. And that was all dependent on these transfers, and they've been incredible. My question there is, they haven't really had to face a hard-nosed physical battle. Is Indiana built for, hard-nosed Big Ten football? Because I think that's also something that people are overlooking when talking about Indiana versus, say Nebraska, and Nebraska's next game after Rutgers, that type of, are they physical enough, and can they beat physical teams with their style of play, do you think?
Boy, that's tough. Indiana's kind of more built like some of these Pac teams, a little bit out west, some explosive offenses. And they've got let's not, when we look at defense, this is an Indiana defense that leads the Big Ten in sacks right now. Mikhail Kamara is absolutely getting after it on the defensive line. James Carpenter, who's a transfer up front as well. They've got some good players on defense. Aiden Fisher, I think, is leading the Big Ten in tackles right now at the linebacker position. D'Angelo Pons is really good in the secondary. Their defense is good. The physicality is interesting because this is an Indiana team that leads the Big Ten in rushing, but individually they're leading their running back with the highest amount of yards is 8th. So they're doing it as a team right now in this run game. I just think they're just they're more balanced than I thought they would be at this point
100%.
in time. I thought coming into the season, top 5 receiving core, absolutely. And we just heard the news of Donovan McCulley transferring, and it really isn't going to be that big of a deal. He's got 2 balls, and he's
last season
10th.
It would have been, but this season.
Yeah, he's 10th on the team in receiving. So, I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal, right? But I think this team is very well balanced. And I think, like we said with Michigan last year, I think they can beat you in a variety of ways. I think they can beat you any way they choose to beat you, right? They've proven to be able to run the ball. They've proven to be able to throw the ball. They've proven to be able to play some solid defense. Now, giving up 28 points to Maryland, I know Maryland has been a pretty good offensive team so far this season, but, certainly some things to build upon for Curt Cignetti. But right now, to be honest with you, I just think this offense is operating at a supremely high level. So when they play some of these physical football teams, I think they're going to make life difficult because of their scoring ability. And when you play these physical football teams, they're going to have to keep up with Indiana. That's the whole Big Ten Pac-12 debate, right? Yes. You say, hey, Pac-12 teams are going to need to be tougher at the line of scrimmage. Okay, well, Big Ten teams are going to need to be faster on the perimeter, right? It goes both ways. It's not just a one-way street. And I feel that way. I feel that way about the Hoosiers. I feel that way about Indiana, where maybe they're not going to line up in an I formation and 2 tight ends and pound it down your throat, but they can beat you in different ways and force you to do things maybe out of the Big Ten norm a little bit. That's what this new era is all about. I think Curt Cignetti is evolving, and man, I think they're ahead of schedule. I had them starting off the season pretty well. It's no surprise that teams like an Indiana or Rutgers are where they are at this point in time, but man, I think they're ahead of schedule in the run game. I think they're ahead of schedule on the defensive side of the football, but I can't wait till they play some of these more physical football teams down the stretch. I know they play Michigan at home a little bit later on in that schedule, because I think that'll be, we talk about styles making fights. I think that'll be maybe that contrast of styles that could be interesting, because we've seen Indiana, they steamrolled their non-conference. Maryland and UCLA are not the greatest, certainly Big Ten teams in the world, not the most physical Big Ten teams in the world. So that does present a challenge. But as I said, this is a two-way street when we talk about this in the new Big Ten.
100%. And it's hard to fault them handling business. Their execution, like to your point, they're farther ahead of schedule than we thought they were. And I think that has a lot to do with just their execution. I don't think I expected them to come out and be able to be as methodical and execute as well as they did in so many facets of the game this season. I thought it was going to take a little bit of time, but Indiana is a fun team to watch. And until, we see them go against that physicality, and to your point, they can take teams out of that game plan, because they are so explosive. You get ahead of a team, you come out and drop 14 on their head before they realize it. And then all of a sudden they're not going to be able to just control the game and try to wear you down in the trenches necessarily. So it's all about just inflicting their game plan on their opponent before they can get them. And so it'll be interesting to see who kind of is the team and what is the strategy and challenge that they face whenever they do finally get some adversity, which they will. But Kurt Cignetti is tremendous. And like, this is the polar opposite of Indiana's, to me, is the polar opposite of Rutgers. Like, one of the things that Maryland did well, they have an explosive offense, right? It's not Maryland's not going to put a lot of drives together, but their big time throw rate is actually towards the top of the conference. It's just, they don't spread the ball out and stuff like that. So Maryland scoring, I think Maryland is able to do that in certain situations. I think they have an explosive enough offense. I just don't think they spread the ball out enough to really. So the fact that they scored 28, Indiana, again, they're just winning the games. Teams come out here and they've struggled this season. So with Indiana, I just don't think anything has stood out in terms of them struggling for me to point at. That's why I think the physicality is the only question that I really have in regards to that, because they have been so good so far.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see some of those matchups, certainly a little bit later on in the season. Now, one thing before we move on to our next point about Kurt that I want to bring up. Now, he hasn't really shown this if you look at his coaching career, and I'm very, because he's a little bit older. This is his first year at Indiana. Like, if they go 9-3, there's going to be, if Florida fires their coach, they're going to be calling Kurt Cignetti, right? If some of these other movements happen, you got to think Kurt Cignetti is going to be at the top of these lists. So I'm very curious to see, what if we do get this 8-4, 9-3, who knows what type of successful season at Indiana, how that process all goes. What contract extension right after 1 year, a big time raise, that type of stuff at Indiana. Indiana's a team, and Kurt Cignetti said this in an interview preseason. He was, he had a certain NIL expectation, and they exceeded that. And Indiana has shown that they are certainly putting more effort into football. And of course, they're a traditional basketball type of blue blood in that state as well. So that's just something that interests me. And he hasn't, like I said, he hasn't shown the job hopper mentality. He has been, jumping up and jumping up and jumping up. But maybe this is a program right now in Indiana that's going to put forth the investment, and maybe that's what drew Kurt Cignetti to Indiana to begin with. So, not saying he's going to go anywhere. I don't want him to go anywhere. I want a team like Indiana to sustain this success. It helps the Big Ten when a team like IU, that historically hasn't been very good, can win 7, 8, 9 games every year. It just adds to the strength of this conference. Maybe some other programs, right, don't want Indiana to be that good, but it's just something that I've had in the back of my head, just something to keep an eye on. If this season is as successful as some people say it is, how's that all going to go once we get to that silly season?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Seeing if Indiana can pony up enough money, or if they're willing to keep him, which I feel like Indiana would give as much money as they could to him, but some of those schools that could be looking for coaches, Florida, they got a lot of money. So, yeah, that is a very interesting point. I appreciate you bringing that up. And now the final point is I want to talk about USC. USC coming in, I think they're 2.5 point favorite versus Penn State, and the ESPN matchup predictor has them as a 53% chance to win that game. Now, or I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I read my note wrong originally, but I have two notes crammed into one here. But how good is USC? Are they a top 12 team? And USC fans, don't jump on me for this, right? The reason why I'm asking this is because USC come out early in the season and they beat LSU, right? And again, I'm very hesitant to judge too much on week one because preseason rankings are crap. They're nonsense. LSU being ranked in the preseason, them coming out and getting a ranked win against LSU. Well, we saw LSU has struggled this season. I believe it was South Carolina. They won on the end of that game. I think South Carolina missed that field goal at the end. Yep. And then they come out and they're tied with UCLA in the first half. So, that was their big marquee win. And they come out against Michigan and, fought tooth and nail, but Michigan wins that game. So is USC a top 12 team? Actually, are they as good as people say? And D'Anton Lynn has done great with that defense. Yep. I still believe that defense will turn more of a corner when he gets more of his players in there, of course. But that defense has significantly improved. Miller Moss is excellent. I love Lincoln Riley as a coach. But right now, are they a top 12 team?
Boy, if the playoffs started today, factoring in Iowa State, kind of being a bid stealer because they'd be the Big 12 champion, the highest ranked Big 12 champion. Right? If you take the highest ranked teams from each conference, they'd be a bid stealer. Okay. Yeah. And then you got the G5 team. USC would be the first team out of the college football playoff right now. And I think they are that fringe team. They are that fringe team. Like right now, I mean, we talked about Michigan before. I think Michigan is overrated, certainly at number 10 in the country. But, when Ole Miss loses, that's just kind of how teams rise and fall at this point in the season. Boy, when USC has got their offensive line playing well, this is an offense that is they're the best in the Big Ten. They're up there with Oregon, right? They're one of the best. They're certainly, and you look at, which should not be surprised to anybody. For people out there that were saying, boy, this offense, I don't know, losing a Heisman Trophy when they're taking a step down, clearly haven't watched Lincoln Riley's career, right?
Or Miller Moss, like in what he did in his limited action, but in all the talk coming into the season about how good he actually was. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so you could put you and I at quarter. If Miller Moss or if Lincoln Riley chose us, we got to trust Lincoln Riley, right? Yes. When it comes to quarterbacks, what the right decision is over there. So. But, I think this offensive line, it's been a little bit inconsistent. We saw how it played against Michigan, how the Wolverines were able to get after it. Even that first half against Wisconsin, where they were able to get some pressure on Miller Moss, and then they get off schedule. But when this offense is on schedule, they're finding their rhythm. Jacoby Lane is really stepping up as a number one guy at wide receiver. That was the big question. Who's going to step up? We got all this talent that we recruited a couple of years ago. Who's going to be that guy? Jacoby Lane is stepping up as the number one all-around go-to guy. Deuce Robinson is that 6'6" type of target on the other side that can go up and get a jump ball. And now you're seeing Zachariah Branch form into the role that I think he was put on this earth to play. And that's being the weapon. That's getting the ball in jet sweeps, getting it out to him on screen plays, just getting him the ball in space and letting him attack. He leads the team, or at least before this last game, he led the team in targets and receptions. And he's not that type of guy. I know that's what the USC offense has been trying to do. They've been trying to get it to him, get him in space, see if he can make plays. And sometimes he has made plays. But I love what USC's offense did against Wisconsin there in that second half. They're getting the ball down the field more, and then Zach can kind of get into that better role. And then we talk about defense right now. Very curious to see about the health of Eric Gentry because he's been flying around the football so far this season. Really excited. But that linebacking core, Mason Cobb is playing a lot better. Easton Mascarenas-Arnold is in there from Oregon State. And then the secondary has taken some big improvements. Like coming into this last week against Wisconsin, this was a top 35 defense, total defense in the country. That is a winning formula. When you factor in what USC is on offense, if they're top 50 in the country, that is a winning formula. What I've seen from USC as these games have gone along is they're starting to figure things out, right? We talked about Jacoby Lane. We're starting to figure Quentin Joyner is starting to get his part of the run game going a little bit. They're starting to figure out the balance between Joyner and Woody Marks certainly as well. And, when Miller Moss has time to throw, boy, he's a gamer. He's a gamer. Like the thing that I love about Miller so far this season is him being able to respond against Michigan, not only once, You
He made some
know,
incredible throws.
they take the lead, and then they had that Will Johnson interception. So he had to respond again. He's got that clutch gene. He's got that. And you look at that game against LSU where he was able to make clutch throw after clutch throw after clutch throw. That's what you love to see from a young quarterback at this stage in his career. I think he's certainly ahead of schedule. And I think his development and how he's kind of played his career has certainly helped. And you would like to see more guys certainly do that and hang around a little bit more as well. But when we talk about how good this team is, I think it's going to come down to October 12th, right? We talked about that date already, but here it is again. Big day, right?
53%. They're given a 53% chance to USC, and again, a 2.5-point favorite coming into that game, which is surprising to me. That's why I'm like, I love USC. And I agree to your point about, it's funny you said if they have a top 50 defense, it's a winning formula, because before the season started, I was like, if they're top 60,
right,
that's going to be a good team, because they were 100 something last year. But 53% chance they're giving them to beat Penn State. I'm not sure about that. And that's kind of,
So the good news for USC, when you look at now that they've had that road game against Michigan, Penn State's at home, Nebraska's at home, Notre Dame's at home. They're tougher their road games are at Minnesota. That's all off the top of my head. At Maryland. I can't remember where the UCLA game is this year. I think
UCLA is at UCLA.
It's at so that's a road game as well. So they're not going to have to go to some of these Big Ten environments.
Yes.
Right. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Ohio State down the stretch. To me, it comes down to that game against Penn State. It comes out. We talk about the physicality, right? If you don't play a first half that was good, and they didn't really play good first half against Michigan or Wisconsin, you do that against Penn State, you're probably not going to come back to win the football game.
Yeah.
Right. They need to find ways to play complete football games. And then we talk about the offensive line issues. Okay. If those continue, Penn State is going to eat you alive. Like they are as good as it gets when it comes to rushing the passer up front. And it's not just Abdul Carter, and it's not just Dan Sutton. Zane Durant had a really good game. He's very quick for an interior defensive lineman. So they got to figure that out. Like that's, I think, the biggest thing that they need to figure out. And then I'm very curious to see how they hold up in the run game. I think, like I said, I think the most improved part of USC's team is their defensive line. Yeah. Okay. I think they've done a really good job holding their own up front up there. But when you face a run game like that, I think it's another step. Yep. Okay. I think the good thing for USC is they've seen a good run game like Michigan. That's going to help them out. If it were somebody else that they might have lost to, maybe that game against Penn State would maybe be their debut a little bit, an eye opener to that style. But they've seen it already. And now I think they're getting acclimated a little bit. So, man, that game is intriguing. That whole day is going to be a fantastic day of football in this conference. So I think that's the day that's really going to show me, can this be a playoff team?
Yeah.
Okay, because if they lose and run the table, they can still be a playoff team. But I think for USC right now, what I'm looking for, like you said, that LSU win, maybe fading a little bit. I want to see them get a marquee win. That Notre Dame game at the end of the year, maybe that's not the playoff team or the higher caliber team that we thought the Irish were going to be at the start of the year. So I want to see them get a big win. And this is their opportunity to get a big win against Penn State. So that game, I think it's a little bit early to tell if they go and beat Minnesota by 20 or 30. I don't think that really shows me much. And even if it's a 10-point game, right, I don't think that really tells me much either. Yeah. I think it's going to be the next week. I think that's when we are really going to be able to tell what direction this team is going.
I agree. And like I said, USC, it's no fault of theirs. I do think that Michigan game, going to the big house, Miller Moss being able to do what he did, not only responding, but on the road, I think that game did a lot for the growth of USC. And I just think, by the time that game comes, they have a lot. They're improving week to week, seemingly in certain areas, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So it'll be really interesting to see how they come into that game, if they're, improve over this week and go into that Penn State game with a little bit of momentum. But it's just hard. It's going to be hard to beat a Lincoln Riley coached team in any game, just because you're going to have to outscore them. If their defense isn't bottom in college football, they're a hard team to beat each and every week. Nebraska's got to play them on the road not looking forward to that game. I got to be honest. That's going to be a tough one. So, but hopefully that physicality can help win the day. But yeah, USC is a great team. And if we question your team in here, no negatives about your team. These are the questions that I am asking, try to get answers for y'all. And then I appreciate Ted. I appreciate you hopping on here to help me answer them. Do you have anything else that you wanted to touch on before?
Well, that's fine. You can say negative stuff about my team because Wisconsin deserves every ounce of negativity.
I almost asked about Fickle and if he's, but I didn't want to question Fickle yet because I really like.
You didn't want to poke the bear a little bit too much. Didn't want to go on a delicate issue. I get that. No, it's been, boy. I mean, when you've got, I saw a clip when you've got Barry Alvarez kind of laughing at what's going on right now. It's not good. It's not good. Now, hopefully, there's a stretch here coming up for the Badgers. They could rattle off wins against Purdue, Rutgers, and Northwestern. All of a sudden, we're back to 5-2, and all of a sudden, the hope is back. But we'll see. That's a fan base that's very a little bit on edge right now. It's a little bit worried about, what could happen, because you look at what Kurt Cignetti's done that we talked about, even Matt Rule, because Rule and Fickle are always going to be compared. Because look at the situations they took over. You had two guys, alma mater guys. Scott Frost went to Nebraska. Paul Chryst went to Wisconsin. Alma mater guys got fired a couple of weeks away from each other during that season. And then you got Rule and Fickle who come in at the same time. And, I honestly believe Rule has his program. Now, having a 5-star quarterback helps, but Rule has his program, I think, very much ahead of where Wisconsin's program is. Certainly right now. Like the record says that. And really, you just watch these teams play, and you can see where Nebraska is ahead of Wisconsin and where they're at. Yeah. Certainly right now. And just the way the Badgers are playing, it's very unfamiliar to Badger fans. I think, this experiment with the dairy raid, I mean, what we're through 15, 16 games, whatever it is right now. Yeah. I mean, it's, I think the experiment is certainly not going as they expected. I said this on my show earlier in the week. I'm like, I think some teams are built to play a certain style of football. Like Michigan is a great example. Like Bo Schembechler, Gary Moeller, Lloyd Carr, they pound the rock. They're physical. And then they hire Rich Rodriguez and they try to do the spread offense thing, and it didn't work out very well, right?
In Nebraska, when they hired Bill Callahan and brought in the West Coast offense.
Another perfect example. And then you hire Jim Harbaugh. You get back to Michigan football. Look what happens: 3 straight Big Ten titles and a national title. Yeah, So
I think that's the biggest.
Like Wisconsin's trying to get more athletic with this spread offense, which I appreciate, which they needed to do. Yeah. All right. But here's the thing: Wisconsin's never going to be able to out-recruit Oregon or Ohio State or USC or some of these other teams to be able to compete at that level to make that offense work. Yeah. Wisconsin and their recruitment of great offensive linemen and their development of running backs have worked because that's kind of their demographic, right? That's what they're able to recruit and do best. They don't have a lot of resources to go out and find that elite level speed like some of these other schools can do. Now, you need that elite level speed. I get it, to be able to compete at that highest level. And I understand why Chris McIntosh wanted to make that hire, why Luke Fickell wanted to hire a guy like Phil Longo that had experience in this air raid type of system. But look what Michigan was able to do and win a national championship. You can still be a power football team and still have a first-round draft pick at quarterback. You can still have guys like Colston Loveland down the field, and Cornelius Johnson down the field, and Roman Wilson down the field. It's all about finding that balance. Every program is different. Yep. Okay, no program is the same in how you build it. So I'm very curious to see what happens with Wisconsin here down the stretch. Yeah. If Phil Longo is a guy that makes it through the end of the season, I would be borderline shocked if he's the offensive coordinator next year. But now at this point, you went in a very opposite direction, okay? Yeah. Bringing in and doing this whole dairy raid thing. What happens if it doesn't work? Now you're back to square one. Mm-hmm. But in today's college football, like Luke Fickell would be 2 years in at this point. Yeah. You gotta turn around things quick. Like year 3 for Fickell, it's gotta go well. Yeah. And if it doesn't, whether it's Longo or whether it's not, and if they're putting in a new coordinator, time's a ticking. And this Big Ten it continues to get deeper. It continues to get stronger. So I think the concern there at Madison is warranted. I think this fan base and this program, they're just used to 8-9. Yeah. They're used to a lot of consistency. Maybe, and I hate to say this as a Badger fan, but maybe being knocked down a peg and having some dose of reality would help that program maybe get back to that physicality up front. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how they develop over time. So sorry, I ranted about that.
No, you're fine, because I originally had the question about Fickell on here, but I didn't want to run too long. But now you brought it up with Fickell. I think the biggest thing too is what you talked about. It's modern college football, and right now it's a arms race, especially in this new Big Ten. And when you're a team that's used to 9 or so wins, and you're coming out and you're kind of towards the back of the pack in this new Big Ten arms race, it's got to be hard to deal with, especially like you said, Rule and Fickell were hired probably a week or a couple days apart, because I remember Fickell being hired first because I actually liked him in terms of as a Nebraska potential option. But yeah, they're always going to be compared. And when you talk about Nebraska being ahead, that's also with Nebraska coming from further behind than where Wisconsin was, so it's like this regression that they're in before they can get to Fickell's, game plan or what he wants it to be. But does he have the time?
I think it's a long-term build there. And you mentioned it because, and I said this a few weeks back, is that, when I compared these two coaches, I thought Rule was in a tougher situation at Nebraska. And now look where he has this program going compared to where Luke Fickell. Now I think it's maybe been more of a change in philosophy, a dramatic change in philosophy at Wisconsin, maybe as opposed to Nebraska, but maybe not, right? Scott Frost wanted to spread it out. He wanted to do some things like that. And now maybe Matt Rule wants to be more physical. So maybe they're kind of going in opposite directions right now. So yeah, it'll be, I'm very intrigued to see where Wisconsin is going to end up in this new big, because here's the thing about Fickell. He's recruiting as good as Wisconsin has ever recruited. Like, these are top 25 type of classes right now, which is exactly where you want to be. Give me 4 to 6 4-stars and give me some and Luke Fickell has shown throughout his time he can develop with the best of them. Look at a guy like Sauce Gardner and what he's become, and he was a 0-star maybe, I don't know, or at the very least like a 3-star. He was very low rated compared to what he ended up.
I think he might have been unrated.
Yeah. So he's proven that he can develop, and what he did at Cincinnati was awfully impressive. But that's his head coaching experience. And Scott Frost was a great G5 coach in a couple of years, and look what happened. I'm not trying to compare those two. I certainly think Luke Fickell's in a better situation than Scott was, and but I think right now we're getting down to where we want to see development. We want to see improvement. When I look at the Badgers on the field, like, you can say what you want, Alabama is the number 1 team in the country, but when I look at that game, everybody looks at the final score, but I look at fumbles deep in their own territory. I look at an offsides penalty that allows Alabama another chance to now score a touchdown instead of a field goal. I look at this last game. I see Tyrell Henry fumbling a punt when he didn't call for a fair catch, and there's someone right a couple of yards in front of him. It's a lose-lose situation.
Yes.
Right. And then you look at 4th and 1. This is the play that Barry Alvarez laughed at. And it's you're lining up in shotgun. You're not blocking anybody on the backside, and you're pulling like 2 or 3 people. I mean, I've watched that play numerous times, and every time it seems like I find something that it just boggles my mind that out of any program, 134 programs in the country, that a team with a W on the side of their helmet can't line up on a 4th and 1 block straight and get 1 yard.
Yeah.
And they can't even push or anything. Like, that's the thing. Like, this team, it's all about finding who you are and your identity that fits in with your recruiting profile. And Wisconsin right now has had everything that they've built for 20 or 30 years just stripped away.
Yeah.
Stripped away. Their identity is no more. They're walking around like the John Doe of the Big Ten. Yeah. Right? Do they want to run more? Do they want to throw more? What are they on defense? Yeah. You can't tell me what is Wisconsin football. Like, I would pose that question to you. What do you think it is? We've known what it has been for 30 years since Barry was hired in 1990. We don't know what it is now. It changes, it seems like, every week.
Yeah, and I knew it all too well before, with Wisconsin owning Nebraska and having about 200 yards from every single running back they ever had come through that program. 200 plus yards on us every single time. But kind of to what I was saying earlier, what you were saying, I personally, I think Fickell with time could do this. I think it's one of those situations where, like you said, you're upending what you have done for so long. And they're going to regress before they get better. However, the execution stuff has to bother Wisconsin fans, because that right there shows a little bit of regression in that regard. And that is not something you want to see. You can regress in the play on the field with your change of philosophy, but you don't want to see a regression in the execution, because that's coaching. And that's got to be there.
It's very like college coaching now is very NFL like, because you see a lot of coaches, they get hired into a situation where the team goes 1-16 or a bad record, right?
Yep.
And they have a time to turn it around. You might draft a quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you look at what happened in Carolina with Bryce Young and some of these other, like maybe Caleb Williams in Chicago. I'm sure he'll get it together and they'll figure it out. But sometimes you don't have time to figure it out. There's always the thing in the NFL, right? Do you want to save your job, or do you want to keep on developing the quarterback, or do you want to keep on developing your team, which takes time?
Yeah.
And general managers in the NFL don't like to spend a ton of time, right, on a lot of this stuff. So it's a very NFL-like, especially with the portal now, where we can bring it. Like Kurt Signetti is going to single-handedly maybe destroy some coaching careers, because for him to just bring in a class of 30-some guys, and if they can pump out now, I know their schedule is the disparity in scheduling. That's a big thing in the Big Ten. Right. But if he can pump out a 10-2 season, that's going to make this thing worse.
Yes.
For other coaches, right? If we get a new coach at Florida, whoever that is, all right, you got 2 years. Well, if Kurt Signetti did it, why can't you do it? You know what I mean? So that's, I think, the more success stories you have earlier in careers. You look at a guy like Luke Fickell going into year 3, you know, it's going to get tougher, and the microscope is going to get more focused on those types of coaches. So it's just kind of the way of the world. It's how things are working right now. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I looked at the schedule next year. They got to go to Alabama out of conference, and the Big Ten is the Big Ten, right? I kind of looked at their schedule. They still got good teams on their schedule. So, you know, it's certainly going to be a challenge. And like if they go, like, the best case for Wisconsin is be like, all right, let's get to a bowl game. Let's keep the streak going. Let's go 6-6. Let's win the bowl game. That's back-to-back 7-6 seasons. And then maybe we can jump forward. If we can get Tyler Van Dyke to come back as that Cam Rising 6th, 7th year type of guy, depending on what they do offensively, maybe that can propel this team into the future. Or maybe we're sitting back here again talking about 6 or 7 wins, and then maybe Chris McIntosh has a decision to make. I think Fickell's a good coach. It's just, you know, sometimes we don't have 4 or 5 years to figure this out.
Exactly.
And it might take Luke Fickell 4 or 5 years to figure it out. That's a decision that the administration is going to have to make.
100%. Yeah. You talk about him being a developmental coach. Well, he has time at a school like Cincinnati, but when you come to a school that has high expectations and high standards, and a standard that has been set in place and been executed for a long while, when you have somebody not living up to that, even in the short term, like you said, everything's being more of a business. It's about money. Therefore, it's what have you done for me lately? As more of these schools look to make more money for the NIL sake and for, you know, conference sake and all that stuff, their leashes are going to get shorter and shorter. So yeah, it's a great point on that. So, but I'm not necessarily rooting for Wisconsin, but again, I like Fickell. I want to see him succeed. So I am rooting for Fickell in a way. So,
and it's not just him. I know we focused on him because of my fanhood, and I get that. But you know, there's certainly other guys in this league as well. That's certainly like Minnesota. You look at where PJ Fleck is right now. He won 5-7 last year. I know he just signed an extension. The buyout is a problem. You know, that I've been heard about. I know I think it maybe goes down next year or something like that. But you know, and the AD here at Coyle really loves Fleck. He does, you know, and he's built a culture, and there's a lot of oars around that campus. That facility. Let me tell you that much. I was there week 1, and there are hundreds of oars going down that tunnel, and it is stamped with his identity, right? Certainly with PJ there, but that's the thing that I heard this on some show over the summer. Sometimes, you know, you fire a coach more to sell hope. If you're not like a Nebraska or a Bama or whoever you are, where you're going to have a packed house no matter what, if you're not that program, you need to sell hope to continue to get, and this is key, donations, NIL, boosters. Like, you need money to pay players now.
Yep.
That's what you need. And if you're like, if PJ goes 5-7 back-to-back years, maybe all of a sudden some of these big donors say, well, this hasn't exactly been a winning program. Maybe I'll give to men's hockey, which of course is a great program at Minnesota, or maybe I'll do this, or maybe I'll do that. So that's why winning and selling the hope, and that comes with a new coach. When Kurt came in, even before they played a game in Indiana, he was selling hope. Google me, right?
Yep.
All of that stuff. He was selling that at Indiana, and they were excited preseason.
Yep.
So will Minnesota get into that situation? Will Wisconsin get into that situation? We'll see. That's kind of the era we're in. So, there are certainly some guys in this conference and nationwide that kind of have to deal with that.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you bringing that up, though. That is something I want to talk about. So, do appreciate you bringing that up. Hopefully, I don't go for 400 yards on us ever again running the ball. So
he's still running.
I still cannot believe y'all ran for over 400 yards on us in a single game. Crazy. But Ted, I thank you so much for joining again. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Do you want to tell people one last time where they can find you?
Yeah, Big Ten Ted over there on YouTube is the main platform. Also on Spotify, you can look it up if you're an audio listener. Also on Twitter at Big Ten Ted over there. Got some previews, reactions, picks against the spread, over-unders, all kinds of stuff here as we continue to go through the season.
Yep, great stuff. Stay tuned there for all of your Big Ten content, and subscribe here for Big Ten content as well. We will be doing a live watch party for the Rutgers-Nebraska game this weekend. So y'all tune in here, watch along on the game with us. You'll see me go crazy, and you'll see my reactions to the game, because I'm a different animal when I'm watching the game versus when I'm doing this. So should be a good time. But all of Ted's links will be in the description, so y'all go support his stuff over there. And he has a Rutgers-Nebraska preview coming up very soon, so y'all stay tuned for that. And with that being said, I will see you on the next video. Peace.